Our mayor hates Trump more than he loves his constituents. Our governor hates Trump more than he loves his people. We come in on the short end of everything if we're talking politically. Let's step out of that and do things the right way according to the word of God. And the values and the interests of that party don't benefit our people. Am I right? Think about it. The values of that party, the policies do not benefit our people. Now, folk come at me for saying that, and then I give them examples, and I just simply say, what did I say that wasn't true?
Yeah, Mary, as if this list of allegations wasn't long enough already, Roberts is now being tied to Baltimore City's long-standing grade-changing scandal.
As the controversies surrounding Ian Roberts continue making headlines nationwide, tonight, Fox 45 uncovering an old lawsuit revealing new allegations stemming back to his time with Baltimore City schools. While serving as the principal at Friendship Academy of Science and Technology, a teacher accusing him of pressuring staff to improve students' grades without cause, even for classes they never attended. The teacher, who was later fired, suing the school system and Roberts for wrongful termination. The lawsuit alleging Dr. Roberts' actions were meant to make a failing school appear successful. That was back in 2009, but the lawsuit wasn't filed until 2013. In turn, the school system successfully arguing the statute of limitations had run out. BCPS also claiming the teacher harassed and threatened school leaders, including delivering a bat to the HR department with a letter reading in part, "I hope it feels good to beat a teacher." Another message reading, "This is why children are not learning." A decade later,
to pass students along or just round the grades, it does a disservice.
Maryland Inspector General for Education Rick Henry confirming serious allegations of widespread grade changing inside city schools. The findings released in 2022 after a 1.5-year-long investigation.
What was very stunning to us is that we were being told that this was not the practice, but we were, as we were looking through all of the documents that were provided by the city schools, we kept uncovering more and more that showed this practice. I mean, it was literally written.
The report revealing more than 12,000 failing grades were changed to passing over a 5-year period, although Roberts was long gone before the investigation even began, ending a nearly 8-year career in the city in 2010. Today, Fox 45 sending the school system questions asking, does BCPS stand by its investigation, finding no merit to the grade-changing allegations against Roberts? Did the district receive any other complaints over the years about Roberts pressuring teachers to alter grades? And in light of the IG's findings, will BCPS revisit the case to determine whether similar patterns existed earlier? We did not immediately hear back.
Now, considering Roberts' immigration status, Fox 45 has also reached out to BCPS, asking them how he was able to pass a background check. However, the school system claims that his employment falls outside of their records retention period. Reporting live in Baltimore City, Rebecca Pryor, Fox 45 News.
So this is insane. All right. So tonight we're diving into the explosive world of education corruption with Emmy-winning investigative journalist Chris Papst, author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Failure Factory: How Baltimore City Public Schools Deprive Taxpayers and Students of a Future. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We are excited to dig into this. You have been on the ground talking about the school system here in Baltimore City, and your book dives into education and gives a warning for all of America. So let's get right into this. I want to start out just from the angle of this so-called Dr. Ian Roberts. With him now being exposed for faking success at a Canton charter school to climb the ladder, despite students skipping classes entirely, how does this mirror Failure Factor's ghost student scam? And what does it say about Baltimore's taxpayer-funded ladder for corrupt educators?
So what is happening with Dr. Roberts is not surprising. In fact, it's quite unsurprising in that This is common. So what Failure Factory is Failure Factory is an 8-year examination of Baltimore City public schools and Maryland public schools. It started in Baltimore City, but as we started to see what was happening in Baltimore City, we're seeing that the concepts that were taking root in Baltimore City concerning education and how the school systems are valuing funding over students and they're valuing data over education. That concept is leaking out into the suburbs and leaking out throughout the entire country. So if we look back at Dr. Roberts, what you're saying is he is falsifying data to make a school look more successful than it actually is. That is the entire school system. What you played there with Rick Henry, the Inspector General for Education, that's an interview that I did with him in 2022. After we first started doing stories on grade changing, where the schools are taking failing grades of students and making them into passing grades so those students can move on to the next grade and eventually graduate. That was an interview from 2022 in which he said there were 12,500 improper grade changes. Now, the biggest part of his investigation that was, again, started after Project Baltimore began doing this in 2017 was that he said upwards of 10% of students who graduated at many schools should not have graduated. And they graduated because their grades were improperly changed from failing to passing. So Mr. Roberts, if he was doing this in Baltimore City, he was not alone. There were many, many people doing this for many, many years.
So this is not an individual or a couple of rogue actors. This is more of a systemic kind of scheme to make sure that they secure the funding based on the data that says these schools are successful versus schools who may not be kind of skewing their data. So how do we tell what metrics, what tools can we use to determine whether or not the school systems are still doing this? Because it sounds like it's pretty profitable, you know, an easy fix to a problem they have.
Yeah, it's very profitable. And the whole concept of Failure Factory is showing this 8-year, it's not just a couple months. This is 8 years of Project Baltimore and me investigating Baltimore City schools. And the question you have is a very, very good one, which I address in chapter 1 of the book. Because before I get into how grades are changed, students are graduating who can't read, violence data is heavily manipulated. The Baltimore City schools simply quit arresting kids. Kids would bring guns into schools and they're not getting arrested. They quit suspending kids. They're making the schools look safer than they are, more successful than they are. They're manipulating all of this data. But there is some data that they cannot manipulate, or at least it's really hard to manipulate. And that is state standardized testing and federal standardized testing. So, you hear a lot about how school systems don't like standardized testing. Well, start thinking about why. It's because they can't manipulate it. And what you see in Baltimore City schools is that you see a graduation rate of 72%. It's the lowest in the state of Maryland, 72%. However, you also have 10% of students are proficient in math, according to MCAP, which is the Maryland Comprehensive Assessment Program. That's the state standardized testing. How do you have 72% of students graduating, but yet 10% of them are proficient in math? And that's the answer to your question. The school system can push kids along from first to second, second to third, all the way up the ladder until they graduate from high school. But what they can't do is they can't sit there with that child and make sure that they're taking the standardized test from the state the appropriate way. So these students are being pushed through the school system. They're not getting the education that they need. 10% of them in 2024 are proficient in math, but 72% graduation rate because you can't manipulate the state testing. So if you really want to know how well a school is doing, don't look at the attendance rate. That can be manipulated. Don't look at chronic absenteeism. Don't look at suspensions. Don't look at grades. Don't look at graduation rates. look at that standardized test number. That will tell you what you need to know.
Yeah. And we've covered this on here before, because you have the left saying that standardized tests are racist. And we've been seeing that all over the country, not here in Baltimore City, but we have a lot of the left saying, oh, these standardized tests are outdated. Should not be used because they are racist. What do you say? Do you touch on that at all in your book?
So yes. So what I touch on is the education establishment doesn't like standardized testing because of the reason I just said. They can't control it. It's completely out of their control. Most all of the other data in a school system, they can control. They can't control the standardized testing, which is why they don't like it. But let's also take a look at this. A few years ago, in 2020, Maryland didn't think that graduation rates were good enough. They wanted more kids to graduate. But what they didn't do was actually say, hey, why don't we educate our kids better? That's not what they did. What they did was they lowered the standards to graduate, and they removed the standardized testing from graduation. And what that means is students no longer have to be proficient in math, science, or reading to be able to obtain a high school diploma from the state of Maryland. And what you're seeing that play out, because you look at our economy, you look at what is happening. A high school diploma used to mean that if you go to an employer, you say, I have a high school diploma. That would mean that you have a certain level of math and reading proficiency and skill. It does not mean that anymore. The state took it all away. Now, when the state took it away, their argument was that the standardized testing, it was really difficult for minority students and those with disabilities to pass the test. But instead of giving minority students and those with disabilities a better education to pass the test, they just take the test away and say, you know what, you don't have to pass this test anymore. You don't have to be proficient, and we're still going to give you a high school diploma.
Wow. Which is ridiculous. The repercussions it has on our economy and our culture are just resounding. I can remember being at college, and I went to an HBCU, and we had regular classes, but they had a set aside classroom, a building for people who were literally paying to do high school over again because they didn't get any education. Like, we have classes in college Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday. They went to school every single day as if they were in high school. But here's the big difference. That free education that you didn't get, you're now paying for. You're absolutely paying for it, and it's putting you behind the 8 ball. It absolutely is putting you behind the 8 ball. So this is not only a problem for these educators, and I use that term loosely, enriching themselves, but impoverishing everybody else. Everybody else is affected by this. This is ridiculous.
Well, you look at Baltimore. Baltimore is a struggling city. You look at the population. Baltimore's population, and this is really stunning. Baltimore's population in 1920 was higher than it is today. This is a city that has been struggling for a very, very long time. And the crime, while it is down, Baltimore was just rated the 4th most dangerous city in America a couple months ago by U.S. News and World Reports. Last year, Baltimore was named the deadliest city in America by HomeSafe. Even though crime has come down a little bit, you still have to compare it to the rest of the country. Crime across the country is down. So relatively, Baltimore is still one of the most dangerous and deadliest places in America. You look at the economy. The economy is going down. Every year, thousands of people are fleeing the city. The tax base is going down. This is a city that is struggling to survive. And I contend in Failure Factory, and I contend in doing all of my interviews like this, that what you're seeing, the crime, the poverty, the blight, that is the symptom of the problem. The problem is that the school system is failing to properly educate the kids that are in this city. And when a student graduates, many of them simply do not have the skills that they need to enter the workforce and take care of themselves and take care of their families. Until Baltimore fixes that problem, Baltimore is going to have a very, very difficult time reversing the trend and succeeding. Now, in 2017, when Project Baltimore started, Baltimore City was probably the third lowest performing school system in America, but yet also one of the highest funded. In 2025, Baltimore is about the third lowest performing school system in America and still one of the highest funded. 8 years, nothing has changed. And that's the point of failure factory, because in those 8 years, Baltimore City has received about $13 billion from taxpayers. $13 billion in 8 years. The graduation rate in 2017 was 72%. The graduation rate today, 72%. Nothing's changed. And it's simply because these school systems have become, and this is the main theme of Failure Factory, they have become places to acquire wealth before educating students. The priority of the school systems is not to educate the students. The priority of the school system is to acquire wealth. That is how you can have a $1.7 billion budget in 2024 and 10% of the kids are proficient in math. If the priority of the school system were to educate their students, 10% would not be proficient in math. It would be a lot higher.
And, as Failure Factory positions Baltimore as a cautionary tale for America's public education system, what lessons from your investigations could conservative-led states apply right now to dismantle similar failure factories elsewhere?
There's a lot. Where do we want to start here?
I know your book, and folks, you got to get this book. You got to get the book.
Absolutely have to have it.
It gives the answers a lot of these questions, and I think it's a very good tool to have when we talk about the education system and the root causes of a lot of the failures within the education system. This book goes in detail and is a great tool to have to kind of push back against some of the woke lies that we're hearing and that we talk about here on the show. But I would like to know if just a couple things you think to dismantle this. Mm-hmm.
So we just talked about how the solution to increasing graduation rates was not to better educate the kids. It was to lower the standards to graduate so you no longer have to be proficient to get more kids to graduate. Okay, that was the solution. And what Failure Factory does is that I lay out a lot of situations within school board policy that people can look for to see if it starts seeping into their school system. Because there are certain things that you can look for that if you start to see them, it's an indication that the academic outcomes in your school system are going the wrong way. One of them, obviously, is if they lower the expectations of high school graduation rates, but that one's pretty simple and obvious. I'm going to give you one that is less obvious, and there's a few examples like this in the book. I give 3 or 4 examples that if you see these things coming into your school system, be very worried because it's a bad indication. One of them is called the 50% rule. And what that is that in Baltimore City, if you look in the fine print of the school board policy, they have a rule where a student, no matter how few times they show up to class, no matter how little work they do, no matter how bad their grades are, no matter how much they don't learn, cannot get lower than a 50% as a semester or marking period grade. So a student can literally, and in Failure Factory, I talk to students, I interview a student who did not go to school for 120 days, but got a 50% because of this 50% rule. They start at a 50. No matter what, they start at a 50. Even if they never step 1 foot in that classroom, they start at a 50. And what that was for was to make sure more students are passing. Now, the school system admits this. They want more kids to pass. The emphasis is on passing, not on learning, because when a student passes, you keep them in the school system, they're less likely to drop out, and you keep getting the funding for that student. But think about this for a second. So in Baltimore City schools, a passing grade is a 60. If every student starts at a 50, out of a 100-point scale, you only have to earn 10 points to pass a course. And the students know this. I talked to a teacher in Failure Factory And she says to me, our kids are very smart. It's just that the adults have set such a low bar that the students are going to achieve that bar. And she said she had students that would come to class, and let's say they're halfway through the year and they have a decent grade. She's like, they'll calculate the rest of their grade knowing I can't give them less than a 50, and they'll take off the rest of the year because they know that they're going to pass because they can't get lower than a 50. Or she said they'll have kids that'll just not come to school for the first semester, know that they're going to get a 50, and then just start school halfway through the year and just do the little work they have to do to get a 60 to be able to pass. And on top of that, one of the big themes of Failure Factory that we're talking about with Mr. Roberts is the grade changing aspect. Many grades of 58 and 59 and 57s are rounded up to 60. So there are many kids that only had to get 7 points out of a 100-point scale because they started at 50, get to a 57, the 57s rounded up to a 60, and then they pass. And that is how you get 10% of the kids in a school system that are proficient in math. And it's happening right now.
Oh my
That's
God.
ridiculous.
Folks, go out and get this book, Failure Factory. Chris, can you just tell people where they can get it and anything else that you would like to share with our audience?
Sure. So anywhere books are sold, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, any bookstore, if they don't have it on the shelves, you can certainly order it. I think that one thing I could just share here, if I can just get 60 more seconds,
Sure.
is when we started Project Baltimore in 2017, I was an investigative reporter in Washington, D.C. And I came here and I had a pretty good reputation for doing what I do in D.C. And some people knew me when I was coming here. And they had said to me, if you're really going to dig into the school system, what you're going to notice is that the school system is more concerned about acquiring funding and hiring adults than they are about educating the kids. Educating the kids is not the priority. And that was really hard for me to hear because I went to public school. My kids go to public school. My dad was a public school teacher for 35 years in Pennsylvania. So that was hard for me to hear. And I didn't believe it. And as I started doing Project Baltimore in 2017, turned into 2018, 2019, 2020, and I started to do this every single day, I started to realize it appears to be right. Wow. And the school system's first priority is to acquire funding. The second priority is to hire adults, and then the kids come after that. And I can give you the perfect example of how I know this. From 2017 to 2024, those 8 school years, which is what Failure Factory covers, the school system has lost 6,500 students because Baltimore is the population is going down. Mm-hmm. So the school system has 6,500 students less. However, it has 1,200 more adults working for the school system. It has $400 million more dollars a year getting pumped into it. And the graduation rate is exactly the same. So taxpayers are giving this school system $400 million more dollars a year. There's 1,200 additional employees working for the school system to educate 6,500 fewer students, and the school system has not moved as far as student outcomes.
Wow, bureaucracy.
That's ridiculous. You know what we need to do, Pop Family, is everybody needs to buy this book. Download it on Audible if you need to just listen to it for yourself, but get a physical copy of this book, preferably in hardback, right? Mm-hmm. Show up to these Board of Education meetings where you got 2 minutes to talk, open it up and just start reading to them and say, this is what I'm seeing here. Is this what we're talking about? And make sure other parents and other interested parties buy this book, because this kind of education, when he's talking about that 50% plan, I've heard that around, and I've got a million other things going. I'm not really paying attention to it, but now you talk about high beams on. They're going to have to explain this to me in a much better way, not because my child is young enough to still be in school. Knock wood, thank God that she's, grown and out of the house. But I live in this community. the same things that can happen in Baltimore because of the lack of education could surely happen here in my much smaller rural community. So I definitely want to keep my eyes on the prize as far as getting these kids educated and living in a community where I can grow old peacefully. Let's hear all of that. And the children have an opportunity at the American dream. It is hard to compete when you were never given the basics. And I think that is the sin of this whole thing. But there's some corruption that we need to get rid of here in this state.
Yeah, before you go, Chris, we have some super chatters here. So let's see here. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate it. Jessica Price with the $5 super chat says, KJ and Nicole ask Chris about kids with IEPs and online charter schools. What's the statistics on that? What effect does this have on the school system? All right.
Well, IEPs are, I mean, as far as Project Baltimore is concerned, the biggest concern we get from parents in a school system is bullying. That's number one. The second one is IEPs. There are an astounding number of students in not just Baltimore City schools, this is throughout Maryland, whose IEPs are not being properly followed. And this is something that we follow very closely at Project Baltimore, because when a student has an IEP, which is an individualized education program, they're designed for students with disabilities. And what the IEP does is it lays out a plan for that student that the school system is supposed to follow in order to give that student the appropriate education. But there are an astronomical amount of students that are simply not getting what they need. However, let's go back to the priority of a school system. It's the funding. So when a student has an IEP, that student gets extra funding from the federal government and also from the state to supply the services for the IEP. But in so many instances, those services are not rendered to the student. But do you think the school system gives the money back? Of course not. They just keep it. So the school system gets the money, the students do not get the services, and the school system just keeps the money. Now, we have been reporting on this, and Project Baltimore has been reporting on this for years, and we keep telling these stories. But there needs to be some sort of uprising from parents, because the school systems are simply not being held accountable. I can do stories like this all day long, and I do a lot of them every single year. But we need to have the community rallying behind and demanding that these schools do their job. These are federal laws. This is IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This is a federal law. School systems in Maryland right now are in violation of federal law, and nothing is ever done about it. It is really alarming, and I'm glad that our viewer brought that up, because IEPs are a huge problem. They have to be fixed, but the people are the ones that have to fix it, because they can't allow this to continue to happen.
Wow. We have another one here. Jessica, again, with the $10 super chat, says Mackenzie has developmental delays and has an IEP and is in special ed classes. By federal and state child ADA law, the state and school district cannot fail her, so she moves up to the next grade regardless. Wow.
Yep. Yeah. That is also a situation. So you have the IDEA or the ADA, and many of these students cannot be held back. But let's talk about that for a second. Is that really benefiting the student? So the student needs to master the material in that grade before moving them on. And it goes back to, again, what we were talking about before. How do you have a 72% graduation rate with 10% of students proficient in math? It's because you're moving them through the grade levels when they do not have the proper proficiencies and the mastery of that particular grade. Now, in a school system like Baltimore, about 12 to 15% of the students have disabilities. They have IEPs. So when you're talking about the large numbers that we've been talking about, the overwhelming majority are students that do not have IEPs. But the same thing is happening to them. They're being pushed through the school system without getting the education they need.
Wow. All right, folks. Kung Fu CJ with the $2 super chat says, hello, Poppin' Politics family. Let's get it popping. Thank you so much. Yes, guys. And if you and we have Liberty joined our membership club, the Freedom Seekers. We have 2 new members, Amanda
Yay.
and Liberty. And Wendy's back. Hey, Wendy.
Hey, Wendy,
Haven't seen
we
you in a
haven't
while.
seen you in a minute, girl. Glad you're back.
Yes, good to see you. Good to see you. Friday nights are always fun, but this is such good information, folks. Definitely go out and get this book by Chris Papst, Failure Factory. And one last thing I want to say is you can also check out Just the Guys interview with Chris. Giovanni interviewed Chris about Failure Factory, and he goes into it. Was a very long, very good interview. I went into in depth. So definitely check him out there at Just the Guys podcast, and you can get even more information about the book and about what's going on in education. We have Jessica with another super chat. Says, this is Shrinkala. Says, setting education low bars, eventually behind bars. All right. Jessica Price again says, what's Chris's opinion on online charter schools? Do you touch on that, Chris?
I'm not aware of any online charter schools in Maryland. Now, Baltimore does have an online school.
Right.
I'm not sure it's a charter school. The charter schools in Maryland are really hard to do because only about 40 in the entire state, and I think 35 of them are in Baltimore City. And the way that the charter school laws are written in Maryland, they were written so that not many charter schools would be created because the unions have a significant amount of power. And the school systems have a significant amount of power, and it makes sense that they don't want the competition. And,
Exactly.
and the way that the charter schools work in Maryland is that if you want to start a charter school, you have to go to your school board, and the school board has to approve it. So essentially, the school board has to approve its own competition. So put that into like a real world perspective. Let's say that you own McDonald's and you have 10 McDonald's in a town. And Burger King has to get approval from McDonald's to open a building. Is Burger King going to get that approval? No, of course not. McDonald's isn't going to approve their own competition. But that's how charter schools are in Maryland. The school board has to approve its own competition, which would be the charter school. So they're really hard to open. I do not know for a fact that there is not an online charter school in Maryland. I'm just not aware of one. The online school in Baltimore City, my understanding is that it does have some success, and I think a lot of it is because of, you're separated from schoolhouses, and you don't have to deal with disruptive kids. You don't have to deal with violence. You can learn on your own. You can learn at your own pace. You can learn quietly, and for a lot of students, that's a very effective way for them to learn.
All right, folks. Well, we will continue, of course, to talk about education, particularly in Maryland, in Baltimore City. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Chris.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. I love these discussions. I spent 8 years of my professional life doing this every single day. So it's a passion of mine. And I wrote this book, Failure Factory, because I do believe in public schools. I believe that they can be fixed. And if they aren't fixed, our society is in trouble. Baltimore can be a thriving city, but it's not going to be a thriving city until the school system starts to properly educate the students. That's why I wrote Failure Factory.
Absolutely. Well, we've got to have you back on. I can't believe this is your first time on Pop in Politics. We got to have you back on. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Wow. I mean, so much. I have so much to say regarding this. Honestly, I think this may be by design. I think that some bureaucrats, particularly here in Baltimore, want to keep our children dumbed down. What do you think about that, Nicole? You think that's the case, or am I being too cynical?
No, I think it's absolutely the case. There's a few things, especially, I'm always looking at things from a political slant. One way to guarantee voters who vote the way that you tell them to vote, that you tell them it's in their best interest, is to not allow them to learn to think critically. And you learn to think critically when you're in elementary school, right? They do this thing in elementary school where they say Johnny was running at 2 miles an hour and fell off of a cliff. Where does Johnny land? Well, your first answer is, I hope he lands on something soft, right? But then after you go through algebra and you learn all of the equations, you say, oh, well, he's going to land, 10 feet away from the cliff. That kind of thinking, that kind of reasoning helps you later on in life when you sit and you think, okay, well, this candidate has raised my taxes. My kids are not getting proper education. I'm not going to vote for this party anymore because of that. Well, if you can't make that reasoning, then you're not going to do that. You're going to vote for the person who knocks on your door with the cute, sweater on and gives you a bag of Utz chips for your vote. And this is what they're doing. This is how Democrats stay in power in blue cities. I believe they are creating a brand new crop of people who are wholly dependent on the government for everything. This is one way to guarantee that the government continues to reign, is to make sure that the people are uneducated. Yeah. And this is what we're seeing.
You're absolutely right, Nicole. You are absolutely right. Folks in the chat, I see you guys have been sounding off all night. We still have some super chats here. Thank you so much. Kung Fu CJ says they are creating government dependence. Absolutely. Yes. Jessica again says, in my state of South Carolina, there are online charter schools. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we have to continue to monitor this, folks. I mean, I know we do preach about homeschooling. It's a great way to. A lot of times, these homeschool kids are much far along than certain public schools. Certainly, depending on your district, but yeah, I still want public schools to thrive. I do. But I don't know if it will, on the rate that we're going. I really don't.
Do you know, KJ, I think back to when I was in school, high school particularly, and it was hard. It was hard. I was a smart kid, but it was hard because the expectations kind of inched up. Every quarter there was more expectations. And I personally felt bad for kids who transferred into my high school, who came from schools where they didn't have a robust classical education. They just could not keep up. They couldn't keep up with the workload. They couldn't participate in class conversations. It took them the time that I could read a whole book, they could only read a chapter. I mean, we read Beowulf in the original Old English, right? If you struggle in modern English, there's no way that you're going to make that transition. And once you did that, the rest of the course was based on that information. When you think of kids who can't participate, not because they don't want to, they just don't have the skill set, that reverberates through their life.
Right.
And then we wonder why some people are disaffected. I mean, they live like they're disenfranchised from the entire nation. How did we get to a place where we're going to have to leave several 100,000 people behind us simply because they cannot compete? It's happening every single day. And this is something that not only parents have to get a hold of, but taxpayers have to get a hold of. We need to hold these school boards accountable. And when I tell you people, vote in these little tiny local elections, people say, oh, it doesn't really matter. It matters. If you didn't learn anything from the scamdemic, you should learn that local elections matter. These are the people who hold your children's future in their hands.
Absolutely. All right, folks. So again, as you all come in, please hit that like button. It helps to get this video out in front of a wider audience, and subscribe. We love bringing you the facts. Love bringing you the, on the ground investigative reporting, like Chris Papps and his book. I mean, I couldn't say it while he was on, but, I consider his book just as important as, what's my other book here? Heather McDonald's The War on Cops, where she kind of like went through the data on these police departments. The left was telling us, oh, the police departments, the police that are racist and corrupt and things, and they're racially profiling Black people. Well, she went through the data in this, and it's not correct. And I think his book is going to do the same thing on education, because again, we are told by the left that they're racist. We need more money. Education needs more money. Charter schools are bad. And, there are, this is why public schools are failing. All of these excuses. And here in Chris Pratt's Failure Factory, you have an investigative reporter on the ground with the grassroots data. So I love it.
How about an Emmy award-winning investigative? I mean, he had so many Emmys behind him. He could have loaned me a couple from my little shelves.
I know.
I feel like he could have just let me borrow one for the good look. I mean, this man really has his finger, on the pulse when it comes to this particular topic. And this is something that he's made it easy for you to be an engaged parent. So you don't have to go out and research it all. You can show up at the school board meeting and demand results. And when they bring up, because I know I've heard that 50% thing somewhere else before. I can't remember if it was here or if it was on the Eastern Shore. But, I have friends that are school teachers and they teach children in much smaller classes, because the population is different. It is still very difficult to even kind of explain away this whole thing about testing being racist. It's like, okay, so the test is not a thing. I mean, it's a piece of paper. It's not racist. A 2 for a white guy is a 2 for a black guy. It's the same thing. So they have to fight through all of that. And once they get through that, then you have to fight with the funding situation. And I can see where some people get lost in the weeds about educating children when their mind is not on educating children, when they're thinking about all the other things. But we really do have to focus in. The Chinese are doing amazing things with their kids.
I know.
And
We gotta get on the ball, people. We have to get on the ball. Yeah. And also, I saw someone comment about this. If for anything, even if you aren't interested in the material, buy him for his pretty blue eyes. My goodness. I have seen this man all on Fox 45, and I love his voice. I always listen to him with the voiceovers and things. But goodness, I never noticed those eyes before. I started to go out, tiptoe away and get my bathing suit and, swim in those pretty blues. So ladies,
you just couldn't help yourself, KJ. You were doing so good.
I know. All right. So we got to move on.